The Blackest Cat in the World by A. Ashley Straker. Thank you for your message. It was so nice to hear another human voice. I do get lonely out here, with only a cat for company. Of course there's Emma, my carer. She's nice enough, I suppose, but she isn't a great conversationalist. She comes in every couple of days with groceries, does a bit of cleaning, tends to the garden, that sort of thing. In my mind, she's blonde and wears leggings and sweaters, and has an easygoing smile. A nice, soft-featured, soft-bodied woman whose chosen role in life is to take care of those less fortunate than her. But I'm not that naive. I'm pretty sure her soothing voice and mild manner belie hardness, discipline of posture, experience in the field in a uniform. I doubt a carer is all she is. Scientists come by too, but they talk even less. It's not me they're interested in. And that's it. I sit by the window sometimes and imagine there's a street out there, a neighbourhood, a city, people. But imagination isn't enough. Not when there are no voices, no traffic noises, no sirens, not even the hum of a power line, nothing but the wind in the trees and the calls of the birds that live in them. Going blind sucks. It's as bad as you think it's going to be. Worse. It cripples in so many ways. Emma says this place is so quiet because it's a site of special scientific interest. An interesting choice of words. And I bet it's beautiful out there. But it's not just the trees I long to see. It's light, colour, contrast, hue, vividity, texture, depth of field, and the reality of a world beyond the reach of my fingertips. And I'm so lonely. So thank you again for your message. I'll tell you everything. I got inky in the aftermath of a rough breakup. Things were still raw, and the proof that my ex had moved on was somehow all over my feeds, even though I'd blocked her. I wanted to move on too, but despite signing up with 4 different dating apps, I'd met nobody. So I decided I needed a distraction, something that would take my mind off singledom, make me seem like a more interesting prospect to anyone who chanced to cross my dating profiles, and also, perhaps, give me a little company. I would get a pet. I looked up local shelters for rescued animals and found one run by a small but nationally recognised charity located just off my route to and from work. I went in one Friday afternoon and told the middle-aged assistant, whose name badge read Gabby, that I was looking for something a little more exotic. I got what I asked for. Gabby looked me up and down, asked a few questions about my home, who I lived with and where, whether I had any allergies, what my blood type was. She pulled out an odd device from a drawer. It consisted of a long slender tube with a digital readout and a bulb affixed to one end. She pointed it at me and squeezed the bulb, and her eyebrows arched as she looked at the display. Finally, she ran a few queries on her PC, printed off a form, and asked me to sign it. I scanned the document. Non-disclosure agreement? Gabby offered me a pen. You want exotic, right? I signed the form. She smiled and tucked the paperwork in her drawer. We might have the perfect cat for you, she said. A cat? I was thinking more like a lizard or an unusual insect or something. Something that might turn into a hobby. But Gabby had already brushed my words off and bustled past me through an adjacent door. I shrugged and followed, wondering if I was going to end up with an ocelot or a lynx curled up on my bed. Gabby led me into a small room separated from the rest of the pet housing by a short corridor. The room was dark, and I walked into Gabby's back. "Oh, sorry," I said, squinting to make out her outline before me. "It's okay. We call this one Inky," she said, gesturing with the suggestion of a ghost of a hand. I looked where she indicated, but struggled to see anything beyond a squarish shape, an enclosure of some sort, I guessed. "Why don't you turn the lights on?" I asked, wondering if Inky might be some illegal product of genetic tampering, like a cat-bat hybrid or something outlandish and, well, ridiculous. "They are on," she said. "All of them." I looked up and realized she was right. There were several dozen incandescent light bulbs crowded on the ceiling, but all I could see of them were faint glowing filaments, muted orange dashes in the dark. I heard the squeak of hinges as Gabby opened the enclosure door. Then I finally saw Inky. Or thought I did. A deeper shadow in the darkness, moving across the floor. I couldn't quite focus on it. It was like a hole through the tiles to an unlit abyss below, but a hole that approached. I heard the soft susurration of clothing as Gabby moved, but this ghost of a shadow curved away from her and was swallowed once more by the gloom. "She's very particular about who she lets near her," Gabby said. "Almost nobody. Why don't you see if you can encourage her?" I squatted down and held my hand out in the direction I thought the odd black cat had gone. The darkness was so thick and full my words fell unconsciously to a whisper. "I've never heard of a cat like this." "Nobody has," Gabby told me. I felt something test the back of my hand. Whiskers. "Where did she come from?" "I don't know. She's been here longer than I have." The whiskers became a soft nose, dabbing cautiously at my knuckles. Then came fur, a feline cheek against the heel of my hand. I heard Gabby's intake of breath. "Amazing." I rotated my hand to feel Inky's head. "Not really. I know how to befriend a cat." "She isn't like any other cat." I shrugged. "Maybe treating her like that is why she won't let you play with her." I stroked the length of Inky's back, using the feel and shape of her body to guide my hand, as if I were doing so with my eyes closed. Then I brought my other hand in low, scooped her close to my chest, and stood up. It was perhaps the oddest thing I've ever experienced, like the part of reality which constituted my torso and half my arms had been blotted from existence. Inky was warm and heavy. I could feel her moving as she breathed, and the brush of her whiskers over my face, but I could see nothing at all. In my arms was just an absence. "Listen to that," Gabby said. "She does like you." I smoothed the fur of the purring cat vacancy in the dark and attempted some half questions. "Oh, nobody knows," Gabby said. "Inky doesn't radiate at any wavelength. Even her body heat doesn't show up in the infrared. She's a complete mystery." She reached out and her hand played briefly against the void. "Aren't you, Inky?" A tiny nose bumped mine and the purring in my arms intensified. "Wow," I said. "Just wow." Then, "I'll take her." So that was where Inky came from. Not some strange alternate dimension, or magical fairyland, or mysterious old shop in an overlooked alley filled with ancient artifacts and esoteric curios as you might expect. Just a charity shelter for rescued animals. I took Inky home in a small cat carrier Gabby lent me, stuffed with blankets from her enclosure. As I carried her out to my car, a dim spot appeared ahead of me, and I had to squint to see where I was going, to even see the lines delineating the parking spaces on the asphalt. I imagined the light flowing towards me, in through the wide mesh at the front of the carrier that allowed Inky to look out. I knew I couldn't drive with such an effect in my car, so I apologized to the void within as I draped my jacket over the mesh. As the fabric concealed her from view, not that she was visible, the light returned to the world ahead of me. I shook my head in mystification as I set her gently in the passenger seat, buckled the container in safely, and set off home. Inky moved in, and my home became a place of love and darkness. She took immediately to her surroundings, to the food I bought her and the catnip mice, and the mini-level cat tree I set up. We discovered we liked to play together, but it took a bit of experimenting to find out that a simple piece of string made the best toy. Thrown objects or rolled balls just disappeared, leaving me to crawl around on hands and knees feeling them out, and the laser pointer I bought just wasn't powerful enough to leave a red dot. Inky did come with additional expenses. My electric bill went up considerably. I had to buy night vision goggles and an extra alarm clock, because the light of dawn never arrived to rouse me when she curled up on me in the mornings, but her companionship was worth it. We played, we snuggled, we spoke to each other in our respective vocabularies. We shared my bed more often than not. I fell in love with her rapidly, despite the fact that I'd never seen her. I could hear her perfectly well, smell her soft scent, sense her movements around my home by air currents, creaking of nudged doors, the brush of whiskers, feel her soft fur and the heat she radiated, and the vibration of her purrs in my presence. Explaining Inky to others was always quite challenging. On the rare occasions I brought a guy or a girl home, I had to shut her away or risk a potential partner being more interested in Inky than me, and sex moving off the table, or bed or floor or whatever, in favour of fascination and blind feline cuddles with her instead. Unlike such guests, I didn't really question Inky's existence, or origin, physics or optical properties. I just accepted her the way she was. But one day, the way she was changed. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon. I was browsing Reddit, a movie on in the background, when Inky woke from her nap on my bed and came to join me. My pupils dilated when she entered the room. The light faded as if someone had turned a dimmer switch down on the sun. An accelerated dusk at 3 p.m. I would never find out whether Clint Eastwood ran the bad guys out of town, as the TV screen faded even faster. Inky jumped up on the sofa, and her edgeless silhouette sniffed around my knees. Then she climbed onto my lap, turned once, twice, and settled down. I turned off the TV and began to smooth her back, following the curves and contours of her body as she rested on my thighs. I could feel her fur, soft and fine under my fingers, but I could not see it. Sometimes, playing with Inky, I felt like a mime. I closed my eyes as she began to purr, to no appreciable difference in the light level, and soon fell into a nap. The noise of the cat flap in the kitchen door was what woke me. I blinked and looked around. Inky was no longer in the room, and my phone told me I'd napped for just over an hour. "Inky?" I called. It wasn't like her to use the cat flap. I'd installed it after her arrival, but she never seemed to use it, and I just assumed she was an indoors kind of cat. I went into the kitchen and stopped dead. Inky hadn't left. Another cat had entered. There were 2 cats in my kitchen, and I could see them. "Inky?" I asked, but the black cat was busy booping its nose to that of the white cat. I got to my knees carefully so as not to spook either of them, and shuffled closer. Inky, at least I thought it was Inky, was a sleek black cat, lean and youngish looking, with yellow eyes. The other cat was white, a little stockier in build, with pale green eyes. I reached out. The white cat retreated a little, but the black didn't. I closed my eyes and touched her, running my fingertips over her head, her back, her cheek. It was definitely Inky. "Inky, you're gorgeous," I told her, and she responded to my touch as she always had. "But where's all your darkness gone?" The white cat nudged my hand with her nose, and I smoothed her cheek too. She sniffed at Inky, then at me, then at Inky again, and gave a little mew. I went to the fridge. The white cat spent the rest of the day on the sofa with Inky, their bodies curling into each other, tails overlapping. By evening I started to suspect I had 2 cats. By the time morning came, when I woke to double the vibrations on my bed, I knew I did. I named her Snow. It was summer, but she was white. What can I say? I'm not that imaginative. We were a happy little family for a while. I got the light back in my home, and Inky got someone to keep her company while I was at work. I don't know where Snow came from. I scoured the neighbourhood for missing cat signs, searched local feeds and ads, but turned up nothing, just as I hoped. Snow and Inky were inseparable. They wandered around the house together, ate, slept, played, and occasionally fought together. I came to love Snow as much as Inky. She had her own distinct personality. She was less prone to chirping at me, but liked to tap my leg gently with one paw to get my attention instead. She didn't endlessly chase the string like Inky, but saved all her energy for single pounces. She didn't form a perfect circle of fur when she laid in the sun, but stretched out instead, exposing her belly. And she really didn't like having her belly touched, whereas Inky loved that. They were my black and white, yin and yang, dark and light feline family. I loved them, and those were good times. But, as they say, all things must pass. The yang wanes and the yin waxes. A few months after Snow's arrival, I woke at night. The cats weren't on the bed, and at first I assumed they were off doing important cat stuff, like cats do when you aren't looking. But something wasn't quite right. I lay in the dark, squinting at the ceiling, trying to figure out what it was. I got out of bed and went to pee, hoping it would come to me. I wondered if I'd forgotten to prepare something important for work in the morning, and my subconscious was trying to alert me. I ran over the forthcoming day's meetings and tasks in my mind as I sat, but nothing came to mind. I finished up and left the bathroom, but instead of heading back to bed, I decided to see what the cats were up to. The house was quiet, and sometimes that meant cute trouble, like the time I found Snow upside down in a box of cereal I'd left out, legs kicking while Inky attacked her tail. Honestly, it was hilarious. I just watched them at it till Snow toppled the cereal box over, and both cats got startled and ran away. I got downstairs using only stray light from the street lamps outside to navigate, hoping to catch the cats in the act of whatever they were up to when I hit the light switch. But when I got to the living room and turned the lights on, it wasn't the cats I saw. A man was crouched behind the arm of my sofa. He was dressed in black and wore some kind of goggles over his eyes, not unlike my own night vision goggles from Inky's light-sapping days. He ripped them up off his eyes, squinting, and as I let out a startled shriek, he raised a small pistol. "Don't move," he said. I don't think I could have. I'd never seen a gun before, not in real life. "What do you want?" I blurted. "Just take it, whatever, just get out." He rose from his crouch, lifting in his free hand a heavy woven sack, and the contents of the sack moved. "Wait, what's in there?" "Don't move," he repeated. "Where are my cats?" He stepped out from behind the sofa arm. The gun didn't waver, even slightly. The contents of the bag twisted and writhed. "Don't take them, please." He took them, but only as far as the kitchen, because as he stepped out of sight, another voice cried, "Freeze!" And then the man was backing up, and he fired his gun into the kitchen. It popped rather than banged, but was answered by a much louder retort that caused the framed watercolour my grandfather had painted to explode in prismatic shards. He dived behind the cover of the sofa and dropped the bag, and as I stood there in disbelief, a minor shootout took place in my living room. I don't recall how many shots were exchanged. Not many, I suppose. I don't recall anyone pausing to reload. I just remember the noise and the violence and how the kitchen door frame and the cushions and fabric of the sofa erupted as bullets tore through them. And I remember a round striking the bag that contained my cats. "No!" I cried in disbelief as the woven material bloomed dark. I leapt forward and grabbed at the rough sack. The intruder gripped my arm and yanked me down into cover with him, pushing and shoving and positioning me as I fumbled to open the bag, so he could then rise, pulling me up by the neck to use as cover, with the barrel of his pistol pressed into my temple, like so many hostages in so many crime thrillers. No more gunfire came from the kitchen. I opened the bag and let it fall open on the seat of the sofa. Snow scrambled out. Inky did not. She lay in the bottom of the sack, and one of her back legs twitched, like it did when she dreamed. The bullet had struck her in the side, and blood was welling up and oozing over her fur. "No, Inky, no!" I gasped, struggling against my captor. The other shooter then appeared in the kitchen doorway, his gun levelled at us, demanding that the intruder release me and drop his weapon. I struggled uselessly, just wanting to save Inky, stop the bleeding, hold her, comfort her, something, anything. But I was helpless, and as I watched, Inky died. Snow poured at her back, nudged her, sniffed her, then let out a mew that broke my heart. I heard a sob escape me too, and my knees went weak, and I slumped back against the man that held me. And then it happened. It seemed almost like I was watching digital art in action, like Snow was on a separate graphical layer from the rest of the room. It was like some unseen user was rapidly adjusting her layers' saturation and brightness. The details of her fur became difficult and then impossible to see, overwhelmed by whiteness. Then the effect bled out from her into the rest of the image. White began reflecting from the sofa, from the surroundings and the room's walls, first making me squint, then shy away, then screw my eyes shut tight. It wasn't enough. My vision turned red, laced with the vague filigree of blood vessels in my eyelids. The man who held me screamed and loosened his grip. I wrenched my hands up to cover my eyes, and I saw the silhouettes of the bones in my hands, through my eyelids, through my skin and muscle. The lights kept coming and coming until even my bones became translucent, and then I saw nothing at all. It took a while to contain the scene. I sat against the wall with my hands over my eyes, listening to radio chatter over the whimpers of the blinded men in the room, until they could be retrieved by those equipped to withstand Snow's luminance. Apparently light leakage from my home was turning night to day all across the neighbourhood. It became apparent that my house had been under surveillance for some time. Not well enough to detect and intercept the intruder, though. At some point Snow came to me. I felt her whiskers and a soft brush of her fur at my elbow, and I lifted her onto my lap. I held her and listened as men and women moved heavy screens into place around us. After a while somebody new entered, and she at least had the courtesy of addressing me directly. She introduced herself. I won't tell you her name or the acronym of the agency she works for. I don't want to give them any reason to withhold this message. She said she had ID, but, well, you know. She said I'd be taken, with Snow, to a secure location. They guided me out of my home. Step, step, left 90 degrees, step, 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 and so on. I held Snow to my chest and trusted their directions. It's not like I had a choice. I was led outside and into the rear of a vehicle, some kind of van, I think, and the door was closed behind me. Before we set off, the woman from the agency made a call. I could hear her through the side of the van. It was brief. "The scene is contained," she said. "The anomaly didn't survive, but its caretaker did. We've retrieved it for analysis." Yes. Well, that's the interesting thing. There's another. It's socialized, with the caretaker at least, but it's too visible. There's no chance of integrating this one. We're on our way to the reserve now. Yes. Well, unless the caretaker wants to give up the new anomaly, or the anomaly wants to give up the carer, I can't see that they have any choice in the matter. And so we didn't. Snow and I live somewhere. Someplace I've never seen, nor ever will. Someplace where scientists come and go, far from any town or village. Somewhere that glows like the sun.